Test 1, 2, 3. Test 1, 2, 3.
Okay, good morning, everyone. We're about to get started with the General Issues Committee special meeting, setting council priorities. As I've seen my colleagues do, I'll let people know who's here around the horseshoe. Councillor Beattie, Councillor Cassar, Councillor Clark, Councillor Danko, Councillor Francis, Councillor Huang, Councillor Kretsch, Councillor McMeekin, Councillor Nan, Councillor Taddison, Councillor Alex Wilson, and Councillor Maureen Wilson. And I'm not sure if others may be joining us as we head into this meeting from a virtual place or perhaps coming into the chamber. Good morning. I'm excited to be here. I hope you are too. We have a lot of great work to do this morning. Quorum is present, so I'd like to call the meeting to order and just remind folks about electronic devices to be switched to a non-audible function. Madam Clerk, are there any changes to the agenda?
Madam Mayor, there are no changes to the agenda, but we do have an additional presentation that will be added at the conclusion of the meeting.
Okay, thanks very much. Can I then have a mover and seconder, please, to approve the agenda as presented? Moved by Councillor Huang, seconded by Councillor Beattie. Please identify your votes. Thank you so much. That carries 13-0. Thanks very much. Members of committee, are there any declarations of interest? Okay, seeing none, we're going to move into the meeting. Just a couple of things. The presenters have to have a hard stop at noon. I think everybody is aware of that. We also have senior staff here in a listening role. As you know, we've done this work kind of separately, and now they're here to kind of get a sense of the conversation. And so I would ask to keep that in mind, that it's a listening role that they're here for at this point, at this juncture in time. Having said that, I do want to say thank you so much to Anil and Lisa, who have guided us through an amazing process. I want to thank everybody for your hard work, not only Anil and Lisa, but every one of you for your hard work. We're talking about what we agree on in this session, the things that we can move forward on as priorities for this council over the term of office from a governance perspective. So again, trying not to get too far into the weeds, but actually to look from the 30,000-foot view, what is it that we want to achieve as a term of council in the next couple of years. So trying not to get too operational, but also to make sure that we are able to move forward in a way that's respectful and collaborative and will achieve things, most importantly, will achieve things for the people of the city of Hamilton. So on that note, I don't want to take up all the time. I know we don't have much of it, so Anil, I'm going to turn it over to you, please. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Madam Mayor. And good morning. Good morning, members of council. Good morning. Good morning and welcome. My name is Anil Gupta. I've had the pleasure, the honor of being involved with this work over the last 5 months. And today, I believe it is a pivotal point for us as we move from strategic thinking to tactical, disciplined execution. A pivotal time when we bring together the aspirations of this council and through this council, the people of Hamilton, to put forth a plan that we will work on in the coming 3.5 years. The objectives for today. We will review and approve the proposed council priorities, as well as the outcomes and measures of success that will guide us in the next 3.5 years through this term of council. Once approved, we will then be able to direct staff and move into a phase of disciplined execution. And therefore, today we will also speak briefly about our next steps and confirm our next steps, which will include things like building detailed action plans that will be built by staff in the coming weeks and months, as well as think a little bit about how we will enable this organization, how we will build the organizational capability to focus and achieve the things that we are setting out in these priorities, and put together a governance system which will allow us to guide the organization, make amends, make changes as we go through execution. So as we start down this path, I'll start a little bit with the reason for priorities, for any organization to have priorities. The Council acknowledged through its motions on January the 25th and May the 10th that Hamiltonians as a whole will benefit most from a council that as a whole will set out clear priorities. Urgent needs of our community will be addressed more quickly and more efficiently by a council that is working together and will make tangible progress on the most pressing challenges and opportunities that lie ahead of us. As well, the council will be more effectively be able to direct staff work and get results that Hamiltonians are looking for. There is little doubt, I think, in anyone's mind that unity of direction from senior leaders is one of the single most important contributions that leaders make. Having unity in direction is much, much more important than probably any other contribution of leaders. Our priority setting was based on 3 key ideas. These 3 key ideas guided this work from the beginning. The first is that any set of priority setting is about making choices. The leadership attention in any organization needs to focus and choose to focus on a few things. And probably equally important, or if not more important, choose not to focus on others. Needless to say, choosing priorities does not take away from the ongoing management of many, many of the critical city services. The second key thought here is about prioritization is about increasing the odds of success. There is no such thing as perfect strategy, perfect choice, or a perfect metric. In fact, perfection is often the enemy of excellence. Attempting to achieve perfection paralyzes progress in organizations. In fact, waiting for or trying to build a perfect plan will almost always lead it to become irrelevant and too late. So it is always better to have an imperfect plan and start to execute and tweak as we go, rather than wait for the building of a 100% perfect and fully known plan. The third is that any successful prioritization combines rigor and creativity. We have attempted through this process to be fact-based, taking in information and facts, data, reports as much as possible along the way, but also driven by the passion of this council, the passion of the people of Hamilton, and what we aspire to achieve. And therefore, through this process, we have balanced out 2 forces at play. On one end is a bold, forward-looking, visionary view of what could be. A BHAG, big, hairy, audacious goals, a North Star that can guide us all. Goals that have probably never been achieved before. But at the same time, this right brain thinking has been balanced with the left brain stuff of being practical and realistic. Bringing together a pragmatic view anchored in reality and a plan that will be credible with anybody who reads it. A plan that is achievable, not easily, but achievable. Our prioritization journey was a 5-step process. We anchored this work in the vision, the long-term vision of the city of Hamilton to be the best place to raise a child and age successfully. From this vision, we identified critical priority areas. This was done in the council workshop on May the 5th. Within each one of these critical priority areas, we have now identified measures of success. What does really good outcomes look like? This is what we will focus on today. And this will then lead to the development of projects and initiatives, which will then need to be enabled through building of organizational capability and will require good governance as we move forward. Today, we focus on the measures of success, outcomes and measures of success. To achieve this, we used a 3-step strategic action planning process. Our first step was to look at our critical priority areas. We worked with 3 working titles: sustainable economic and ecological development, livable neighborhoods, and working of City Hall and trust in municipal government. Within each one of these critical priority areas, we identified measures of success. In defining these measures of success, we attempted to identify what does really good look like. What would we want to accomplish at the end of term? This could either be qualitative or quantitative. A quantitative KPI with a goal that can be measured. In identifying those goals, we were careful about choosing goals that were valid, that were reliable, that captures the essence of what we wanted to measure, but at the same time could be measured accurately, could be measured precisely. And we built on existing measures within the city. We also aligned many of these goals with council-approved strategies and priorities and plans, and also set targets that were stretched but achievable. In some cases, you will see the metrics are to be defined, as there is work currently underway to get a good baseline. And so you will note that a few KPIs are actually not clearly defined yet. In some other cases, our targets and measures of success are qualitative, capturing the essence of what we want to measure. After all, the most important things in life, they say, just cannot be measured quantitatively. And therefore, sometimes a qualitative measure is more appropriate to capture the essence of what progress looks like in a particular area. So we will see that as we go through all the measures of success. Once this is complete, we will now be able to move into identifying the projects and initiatives. This is next steps. And once the measures of success are approved, this is the work that then can be initiated by city staff. And will come forward ahead of the 2024 budget. Throughout this process, we used a highly participative and informed process. At every stage, an iterative process of divergent thinking, taking in inputs from many, many different sources, and then converging to key themes. Along the way, we had several points of individual input from members of council. 2 separate council working groups solicited inputs and gathered feedback at various points throughout the process. We had a series, may I say a long series of very long meetings, fueled by copious amounts of coffee and the occasional pizza, and to review all these inputs and to build the draft recommendations that we are bringing forth. On May the 5th, the council workshop was designed for individual reflection time, small working group discussions, as well as complete council discussions as well. We also looked at many different sources of data, which included themes from our city survey, which was public input, the approved 2023 budget, a number of different council motions, approved strategies and plans, and we also solicited input from SLT on measures of success and target setting. Through all of this, the result. We have identified for this term of council 3 council priorities, 9 outcomes to be achieved, and 20 measures of success. We believe that these, once approved, will set the organization up to building plans and action plans and project identification, which will then allow us to start moving forward. And therefore, at the end of today, this presentation, I will also be talking very briefly about next steps, how we will be building detailed action plans, and a few key items that we will need to work on to resource and enable the organization to move forward, as well as putting in a good governance structure. I will now move to walking through the 3 council priorities, 9 outcomes, and 20 measures of success. A single sheet of paper with capturing all of this has been handed out to everybody as well. Our first priority, the first priority here we will talk about is sustainable economic and ecological development. This is the final title that has been that is being recommended and remains unchanged from our working title. Okay.
So can I just ask councillors actually to have Anil go through the presentation, and then we can bring up the issues you want to raise, and so that way just keep a little note of the things that you wanted to go back to, and as we bring one on the table, then I would ask that all people that want to speak to that one issue, and then we'll move on to the next and the next, because we do have a really tight deadline and we want to be able to keep track of how we're going. So thank you, Councillor Huang, for reminding me that I forgot to say that at the beginning. Please go ahead, Neil. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. The first priority, our final title, which remains unchanged from the working title, Sustainable Economic and Ecological Development. We clearly heard from the Council and all of our input that the focus needs to be on development, but do development in a way that is sustainable, both economically sustainable and ecologically sustainable. But development was the underlying theme that is captured in this Council priority. For this priority, there are 3 key outcomes. The first is increasing non-residential growth rate. There was a lot of discussion on what would be the right measure of success. And we chose here very consciously to stay away from measures like tax rate ratios, which are both complex metrics as well as difficult to move within a relatively short period of time, because they have several different inputs and factors that impact that ratio. And therefore, our first of 2 measures of success here is to increase new commercial and industrial construction by 1.4 million square feet and $500 million in construction value per year, with an ecological and economic lens. Both of these targets are stretch targets, targets that have never been achieved in the City of Hamilton before. They are also aligned with the Economic Development Action Plan, and the ecological and economic lens that we talk about here is a lens that still has to be developed. That filter will be developed as we start to operationalize this measure of success. Our second measure of success is to create ecosystems and supports that will build a breeding ground to leverage and facilitate growth of businesses, all the way from startups to large industry, in 8 key industry sectors. These were identified in the 2021-25 Economic Development Action Plan, and include industries like advanced manufacturing, agribusiness and food processing, creative industries, finance, insurance, and real estate, goods movement, ICT and digital media, life sciences, and tourism. A qualitative measure for sure, but the development of that ecosystem will have to be, we will, as we start to move forward, identify what are the key components of that ecosystem, and then start to build towards that. Our second outcome is climate change and progress on decarbonization. Our first measure of success here is to accelerate the city's current climate change action plan goal, which currently stands at a 50% reduction in total corporate greenhouse gas emissions from the 2005 baseline. So originally, currently our goal is to achieve 50% reduction by 2030, and we are accelerating this to achieving a 55% reduction by the end of 2026. The focus here is on corporate greenhouse gas emission. Needless to say, there is work happening in the community. However, here was a metric that we could control, we could measure precisely, and therefore we could focus on as leaders to show what we within the corporation are doing. Our second measure is to increase urban tree canopy coverage by 2% by the end of this term of council. This will be achieved by targeting 20,000 tree plantings per year. Once again, a goal that has never been achieved before, currently standing somewhere around 10,000 trees per year, which will move us towards the goal of achieving the city's urban tree forest strategy target of 40% urban tree canopy coverage by 2050. So this is aligned with council-approved plans. At the same time, these tree plantings will be prioritized in neighborhoods with the greatest need based on the neighborhood tree equity scores that is currently being compiled and will be completed by the middle of 2024. Our third outcome is the protection of green spaces and water. Measure of success, the first is to increase publicly owned natural areas, parks, and public spaces in hectares. The inventory is currently underway and is targeted to be complete by the middle of 2024. And a target will be based on what the inventory numbers come in as. And the second, the acceleration of our proposed watershed action plan for council approval by 2024, followed by the implementation of this plan in order to support the delisting of the Hamilton Harbor as an area of international joint commission concern. The next council priority is safe and thriving neighborhoods. This is a recommended title. We made a small change to the working title to capture the essence of our outcomes. Our first outcome here is to increase in housing units for all and reduce homelessness. Our first measure of success, the first of three, is to facilitate the approval of 20,000 new housing units by the end of 2026. Once again, a stretch goal, higher than what has been achieved in the past, with 1/3 of these being available as rental units and including at least 10% that are affordable and/or permanently supportive housing units. The second is the preservation and maintenance of the affordable rental stock in the private market, in addition to the 13,124 units in the nonprofit sector and/or the community housing. A metric related to the private market will be developed with the Canadian Housing Evidence collaboration by Q4 of 2023. And the third is the reduction in the number of individuals who are actively homeless by 30% and facilitate the increased capacity within the shelter system by the end of 2026. Our second outcome in this council priority is the improved mobility, accessibility, and road safety, where we have three measures of success. The first, achieve Vision Zero and do this every year. The second, more than double the pace of construction of new and upgraded active transportation facilities, separated bikeways, connected bike lanes, and paved multi-use pathways from approximately 15 kilometers per year to 40 kilometers per year. And the third, to increase transit ridership to pre-pandemic numbers, which were around 21.7 million by the end of 2026, while improving accessibility for everyone. Our final priority is the working of City Hall and transparency in municipal government. You will notice here, once again, our recommended title is a little shift from the earlier working title. We replaced the word trust with transparency. Trust is something we can work on, but transparency is something that we can directly act on. Trust will be built. Trust will be built once there is transparency. The starting point of building trust is transparency, and hence we chose to use the word transparency instead of trust. Trust will be the outcome. Within this council priority, there are 4 outcomes. The first is the implementation of a new budget process. Our measure of success here aligns with the council priority that has already been approved. So we took this language straight out of that approved motion to develop a plan to transition to a revised budget process beginning in 2025 budget year. It emphasizes long-term financial planning through asset management principles, considers equity, diversity and inclusion, carbon budgeting principles, is accessible, prioritizes public engagement, promotes transparency, shifts the timing of the budget from early Q2 to mid Q1 every year, and integrates the current operating, capital, and rate budgets into 2 annual budgets: water, wastewater, and stormwater rate-supported budget, and a tax-supported budget. Our second outcome is improved public engagement. Our first measure of success is consistency in corporate-wide application of enterprise public engagement policies and practices. And the second measure here is improved access and reduced barriers to participation for public engagement activities. Both of these measures, you will see, our KPIs here are to be determined. There is work underway to build a public engagement policy and framework. This report is due in December this year, and we would like to align the metric with the recommendation of that report. Our next outcome is efficient customer service and communication. We have 2 measures of success here. The first is to establish an enterprise customer service strategy by Q1 of 2026. Currently, we do not have a strategy, and so putting a strategy in place is the qualitative measure of success. This would lead to the measurement and tracking of 100% of customer interactions and an implementation of an enterprise customer service standard, therefore shifting the organizational culture to be more responsive and more creative. And the second measure of success, to implement customer-centered design in all city initiatives through the implementation of the city digital strategy. Once again, a strategy that has been approved by council. And finally, the outcome of being employer of choice. Our measures of success here are first, corporate-wide voluntary turnover rate. This does not include involuntary or retirements, to be maintained at 7% or less, in line with industry standard. Improve the declining job offer rate. This is a metric that is currently not tracked, and a baseline will be set in 2024, and improve employee engagement index in our 2024 Our People survey. 2017, our engagement was at 69.2. In 2021, 69.1. So the outcome, the measures here you will see are all about hire top talent, keep top talent, and keep them highly engaged. Three dimensions of our employee engagement and interaction. Members of council, these are our priorities, the outcomes and measures of success for this term of council. Once approved, we will be able to start looking at and building our next steps. As we think about next steps, once again, the purpose of prioritization, this exercise is aimed at identifying the critical areas that council will focus additional time, additional attention, discretionary budget and resources towards. These targets, collectively, these 20 measures of success and targets that we have proposed here are bold. They will not be easily achieved. They will require a lot of work, a lot of focus, a lot of extra attention. But they are possible. It is possible with organizational focus, not just council focus, but the entire organization focus, disciplined execution, and very, very good governance. And therefore, two questions here need to be answered. The first is, how will we get additional resources and special leadership attention to these priorities? And therefore, these initiatives will need to be enabled. The organization needs to be enabled. And how will these initiatives be governed? So let's talk about enablement first. This enablement will happen through building of organizational capability. This is the fourth step in our prioritization journey. As we move into enablement and disciplined execution, the first thing that we will have to ask ourselves is, how will we build this organizational capability to focus on these priorities? The first, we are recommending that staff build detailed action plans, and through those action plans, identify the resources required to action the projects and initiatives. The second, this is the time that we should critically examine the work that is currently underway. And are there projects, is there work currently underway at the city that can be deferred, can be shelved to free up resources, free up funds, so we can move them towards these priorities. And the third, staff to critically examine the work underway and consider the decluttering of work that has limited value to the city. I use this word gently. All work is important. All work has a good reason. Some are, though, pet projects, somehow probably past. The need for us to abandon in a planned manner, abandon work that was very useful once upon a time, but now continues to linger just because we have always done it that way, needs to be reviewed. Reviewing our subcommittees and volunteer advisory committees that do not align with council priorities. Align our outstanding business list, which runs into several hundred, to council priorities. Review and revise delegated authorities. Review and potentially stop limited value initiatives, non-legislated annual reporting, and many other initiatives. All of this will enable the organization a lot more, but this is work that needs to happen soon after we approve our priorities. The last step, probably one of the most critical steps. It is the last, but this is the step that will keep us on track. Planning is easy, execution is hard. And the only way that good execution happens is if we have good governance and good support. No plan is perfect, and that plan will need to continuously be amended, reviewed, and resourced as we start to move into execution. This is the fifth and last step of our prioritization journey. Completed ahead of the 2024 budget process, we need to put some governance in place. Here, I will recommend we have two key actions to think about and to put into motion. First is the construction of what I call a gatekeeper for all new initiatives. Decluttering the organization will free up resources, but now ensuring that we don't overload once again by having a gatekeeper critically examining all new work that is coming forth, and all new work, both from staff recommendations as well as council recommendations, to ensure that they align and they support and they are the best possible use of resources to move our priorities forward. And the second, the key purpose of all governance is to identify negative deviation as early as possible, and therefore allow for recovery of plan. Every plan is a hypothesis. These plans will not work as we would like them to, But knowing very early that they are off track and therefore have an intervention as needed is the critical role of governance. To enable this governance, we should consider the assignment of a champion or a sponsor to take accountability. For each council priority outcome, for each one of the 9 outcomes, there should be an SLT member that takes accountability. And for each measure of success, each one of the 20, there should be a director-level staff person who will take accountability for that. The next step then would be to set a frequency and format for report out. Frequency. I have always advocated more often, more frequent is always better. We want to know early when we're off track than later. No less frequently than every quarter, at least 4 times a year. My recommendation is at least 4 times a year. And a format that is administratively light and therefore single one-page report outs, simply identifying where are the pinch points, where are the negative deviations, where do we need help, where do we need support, where do we need additional resource. If things are on plan and working on plan and we're achieving the goals, much discussion is not needed at the governance table, and your project teams will continue to work on those. It is the negative deviations that we need, single one-page report outs. And finally, communication and change management. This is a lot of work has gone into this over the last 5 months, but now it is time for us to use all of this to inform, to educate, to inspire every single person across the city, in City Hall as well as Hamiltonians, and therefore a really good communication and change management plan, first focused on getting buy-in within City Hall with city staff, and then across the city with all Hamiltonians. In closing, I believe we have a very comprehensive and an aggressive plan. I believe this plan captures the collective aspirations of this council. I believe that it promises to deliver a very successful term of council if we can focus and execute this plan that we have put together. I had the honor of facilitating this work, and I'm really grateful for the opportunity to do this. But I also have to end today by acknowledging that I could not have done this work without Lisa by my side throughout this process, guiding me, advising me, connecting me with the right people, organizing things, and sometimes kicking me into shape. Many, many long conversations, deep into the evenings, over the weekends, lots and lots and lots of conversation. Her passion, though, was compelling. Her passion to do this work and do it well was truly compelling for me. And her commitment to the city, if that is a reflection of what our staff are committed to do, then this is truly an inspiration for both me as well as should be for each and every one of us. So thank you. Thank you very much, members of council, Madam Mayor.
Thank you, Anil. I appreciate the presentation. Have a speakers list coming, but if I can just say a couple of quick things, one of which is this was an attempt to bring all of us together from all different parts of the city, from all different backgrounds, representing all different wards, with all different, value systems and beliefs and visions, and to try to boil it all down to what we, this team, not a different team, but this team, can manage to get our hands around and actually achieve for the people of Hamilton in these next 3.5 years or so. And so, as Neil mentioned, it's not perfection, and it's not one person's words or vision. It is a collective, collaborative boiling down of all of the things that we've talked about for months on end. And it would be probably inappropriate for me not to mention the smaller teams of councillors that volunteered to help guide this process through its many iterations. And it was not easy, and it was very thoughtful work, and there was a lot of follow-up with colleagues through the process of those smaller teams, and I'm very grateful. I'm very grateful that people stepped up to do that work. So I'm going to open this now to some questions and comments, but I would ask that folks keep in mind that this is, as Anil said, this is about our collective aspirations. It's about finding that common ground. It's not about the nitty-gritty detail, which then will mire us in a place that we won't be able to get out of. It'll mire us into quicksand, and we don't want that. What we want is to be able to move forward with a broad vision, with some priorities set, with some outcomes identified, so that our administration, the ones that we're responsible to guide as governors, understand what it is that we want to achieve as a council over the next little while. So I very much appreciate the effort put in by Anil and by Lisa and by all of you, as I said earlier, and particularly noting that that a couple of councillors worked really hard over the process to bring us to a place that we could find some commonality, and that's what this is all about. So on that note, we have Councillor Huang, please.
Thank you, Anil and Mayor. I thought that at this point to clarify or ask questions around the very first council priority, sustainable economic ecological development, but the measure of success is the create ecosystems and supports that will build a breeding ground. So is this the time now, Mayor, that we can ask to clarify some of those specific points and then maybe clean up the language a little bit? Or how do we want to move that forward?
Well, I would say that, and this is, I guess, for discussion and maybe with some input from the facilitator, but my sense was that these were the kind of the broad strokes, and that we would be hearing back, particularly on ones like this that don't have specific KPIs attached, from our staff that will come forward. And so again, we're setting, so we have some of the KPIs, right? The 1.4 million, 500 million, all of that. But we also have some key sectors identified in terms of the economic plan. My sense would be wordsmithing is really not what this is all about, but identifying if there are larger kind of pieces you think are missing is probably worth putting on the table.
Okay. So in that vein, then, I think that perhaps the wording around creating ecosystems and supports is a little bit too specific. So the idea of creating a business environment that is open for, perhaps using the same words as open for business, but I'm trying to figure out if we are forgetting about the aspect of how are we actively servicing our business community by initiating more permitting, like a more efficient permitting process or some sort of that. I don't know if that's been kind of integrated into that particular point. So my sense is that to build these ecosystems and supports, that we need to also include some level of measurement where we can have KPIs around a smoother and more efficient business permitting process, enabling more businesses to feel that they have been supported by the City of Hamilton, that sort of metric.
Absolutely, and that's exactly the kind of, this is why SLT is here and why some of the senior staff are here, is because this is exactly what they have to come back with. It's not up to us to be in the weeds with those details. It's up to them to come back and say, you told us you want us to create ecosystems and supports that will build a better breeding ground to leverage and facilitate the growth of the business. Here's how we're going to do that, governors. And governors say, that works for us, or no, you've forgotten this, and please go back to the drawing board. So that's the operational versus the governance, and that's what part of this is all about. And it's hard, don't get me wrong. I know how hard it is, it's very, very hard. But it is our job to be the bigger picture people that then hold the SLT and the staff to account when it comes to the priorities that we have set. And so it isn't up to us to be operational. Certainly it is for us to say whether what they bring back operationally does or doesn't actually meet our requirements in terms of reaching the goals that we've set in the priority setting. Does that make sense to you?
Yes, and I wanted to ensure that my council colleagues understood what this particular point was really trying to push forward. The idea of ecosystems and supports may be a little bit unique and very targeted. The reason why we've put ecosystems forward was because this is at different levels of government, known language that other levels of government understand. So when we're talking about how we are investing in different areas, ecosystems is a very specific term that can speak to different levels of government. However, I understand that it's a very insider baseball kind of term that perhaps the community may not understand. So I do want to ensure that my council colleagues potentially got a little bit extra from this particular point, understanding why the word is in there. So thank you, Mayor.
Thank you, Councillor Huang. So I'm just going to ask if there are other folks that want to talk about the Council Priority Sustainable Economic and Ecological Development section. I have on the list thus far Councillor Maureen Wilson, Councillor Noun, Councillor Cretch, Councillor Alex Wilson. Any of you on for this particular first topic? Okay, I see some nods. So let me just go one by one. Councillor Maureen Wilson? Okay, please go ahead.
I do, but I do have a, sorry to linger on it, just a sort of like a nomenclature question with respect to expectations. I think what I've heard, Mayor Horvath, is that the intent of this morning is not to get hung up on language per se, but to focus our energies on sort of general targets or intent. Is that correct?
Anil?
To the mayor. Yes.
And if I could maybe just give one example, so I don't want to set you up for, and I'm trying not to infuse my approach with my personal, but I personally, and as a governor, have some challenges with the word customer service as it relates to public service, because I think it's too often void of other objectives which only government is tasked with achieving, including objectives and criteria related to accessibility and equity. So I want to understand in my approach to this exercise how whether I either advocate for something or park something because it's not part of today. Thank you.
Anil? I don't know if
Thank
you
you.
wanted to respond, but
Absolutely.
I don't want to take up
To the
council's
mayor,
time.
thank you. To the mayor, so two comments I'm going to make. First off is the intention of today, and as we think about these measures of success, as you can see, some are quantitative and some are qualitative. The qualitative measures are qualitative because we have to acknowledge that some, in fact, all the important things in life cannot be measured accurately. When we start to measure them accurately, that needs to be done at a time when we have a very, very good grasp of that area. And so if we look at, for instance, creating the ecosystem and supports, this area, I think, requires for us to look at this more holistically, rather than one metric or a few metrics that'll capture whether we are open for business or we are encouraging new businesses. The leveraging and growth of key industries will require for a number of actions to be done. And therefore, the measure of success needs to be more holistic than a very, very targeted, very focused number, KPI, a metric that tends to become very laser focused, very good in some areas, but in some others where we will have to be qualitative, we'll capture it a little bit better. The second point I'd like to make here is maybe the choice of the word customer and customer service. in government, when we talk about, or in any organization, when we talk about customer, I have used the term customer to mean everybody we serve. And for any organization, there are typically, we say, 4 customer groups. One is the person who actually receives the product or service that we deliver. For us, the recipients of the services of the city. The second customer is our own team members, our own employees, our own staff that are the only active living force in the organization and deliver all the services and do all the work and bring the intellect, bring the hard work, bring their passion to work. The third, and a very distinctly different customer, is the person who is paying. In our case, the taxpayer. And sometimes the person receiving the service versus paying for the service is 2 very different individuals. Or if it is the same individual, has 2 very different roles and 2 very different mindsets as they use a government service versus pay for it. And so we have to think about them in that perspective. And the fourth is the larger community outside of the community, the society, the country that we are all part of. So I have used the term customer service we have used the term customer service in this to say when we think about customer service, it is that more holistic definition of customer rather than the very transactional, the person who's simply receiving a product and paying directly for it. Does that answer or provide a little bit of insight, Councillor?
Thank you. With the specific comment with respect to the increased or the sustainable economic and ecological development, I'm just flagging, I think, a concern or hopefully a goal in relation to increasing new commercial and industrial construction by 1.4 million square feet. At some point in the process, whether it's with staff coming back or noting it now, I'd be more interested in having some more detail about the full measure of a rate of return. So here, where I'm going with this is I don't think just the measure of square footage is enough for us to achieve both economic and ecological development. I think it has to be, in my opinion, more informed by either the assessment on a square footage basis or something like that, so we're not unintentionally putting a premium on commercial and industrial sprawl, for example. Thank you.
Thank you. I don't know if you wanted to respond to Anil. Certainly, go ahead.
Through the mayor, absolutely, and that was what we attempted to capture in the ecological and economic lens. That lens should not just be a qualitative, I have this in mind, but some sort of a filter that talks about tax rate or use of land and so on and so forth. So that lens will still need to be developed as we start to put this measure of success in place.
Thank you. Councillor Wilson? Okay, so this, it looks like we're kind of moving around the document. So we next have Councillor Nan.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. My comments are primarily on safe and thriving community as well as employer of choice. And appreciating that what is before council today, committee today, is an attempt to bring together many priorities and also getting to a place of having both bold targets, but I think also you mentioned achievable, possible. Possible was the word. So something that's just not sitting for me is the increase in housing units for all and reducing homelessness. The first target bullet indicates an approval of 20,000 new housing units by the end of 2026, and then says 1/3 being available as rental units, so that's 6,000, including at least 10% to be affordable, so that's 2,000. And then there's the vague reference of and or permanently supportive housing. And the reason that I'm raising this is not out of personal interest, although yes, it is. in terms of my role around this table. The access to housing waitlist currently exists at 6,000 plus and continues to grow. Our current by name list is currently standing at 1,600 and continues to grow. Our current number of individuals living encamped is about 160 and continues to grow and seasonally fluctuates. Those are real indicators with which this council has to deliberate and work with our staff to address. And my concern with the target being set this way and articulated this way is that there's no context of that list and those numbers, and there's no target or desire to reduce those numbers on those existing measures and metrics that we currently use in the corporation that guide our programming, that guide our services, that guide our grant applications, that guide our advocacy to the provincial and federal government as well. So I put that all out there with a desire for some feedback from you on how that might be more clarified in terms of a measure for success.
Anil?
Through the mayor, this was a challenging one. We spent lots and lots of time and lots of deliberation on this, and we went back and forth. Nearly every single word here was talked about and discussed. Facilitate rather than build. Approval versus then actual units, right, and so on and so forth. These numbers, eventually, we chose to align with council approved the housing pledge that has been approved by council, and other plans that have already received council approval. Okay. At the same time, these numbers, the 20,000, was a number that was stretched. It is higher than we have, I believe, ever done before. So it does accelerate. It does take this to the next level, and addresses the chronic and very serious issue that we have. Could this number have been higher? We deliberated with what was the breaking point. What was the point at which this number would really not be achievable? 3.5 years. What is a number that is realistic, that we can put out there and say this is a serious number rather than just a hope and dream? And that was the basis on which this number was arrived at. It was a practical number. It was stretched. It was, and it was one that we felt we had an adequate amount of control and influence on.
Thank you. So through you, Mayor, so the already approved council plans, got that, versus new targets. I guess that's my question. So appreciating that these are what we want to achieve within this term of council, recognizing the limitations that you've just articulated in terms of possible achievable. I guess in my view, we're looking to build a community that eventually has no homelessness, where everybody has a right to housing, where we are a thriving community regardless of income level, and that we're consciously moving towards addressing the income disparity, but also more importantly, the market crisis that has created an ever-growing homeless population in our community. And so when the further bullet hits a target of 30% to be facilitated as reduced active homelessness, I appreciate that we're trying to set a target that we can hit, but I guess I feel like sometimes as leaders, we got to hit target, we got to name our bold outcome as something that we're not going to achieve, because it necessarily deliberately forces us every year to assess our plans to make sure that we are accelerating our progress towards that. Yeah. And I appreciate 3.5 years is not enough time. So those are my comments on that one, Mayor. The last one around employer of choice and just generally speaking under the working at City Hall and transparency in municipal government. I'm just curious where equity, diversity, and inclusion went, as that was a pinnacle piece of conversations up until today.
Anil?
Through the mayor. So EDI, equity, diversity, and inclusion, was once again discussed in lots and lots of detail at nearly every stage. We believe, though, that it is a core value. It is a lens that has to, that is the bedrock for everything that we do. It is, at this time, is this a priority in terms of it not being a value for us? Then it would have risen to the point of becoming a priority. But it is a core value. No different from integrity, no different from doing the right thing, no different from many of those others. And therefore, EDI, while critically important and needs special attention, was understood to be an underlying theme in every one of those priorities, rather than be one standing in of its own.
Councillor Nan?
I'm going to hold, that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kretsch, please.
Thanks, and thanks to the efforts of those who worked on this, yourself, members of staff. You know, it's a lot of work to try and distill, I would say, the thoughts of 16 individuals into these various words and pieces of paper. I would say I'm struggling a lot with this, like a real lot. Not like just like, oh, I have some tinkering word issues. I'm like, I don't know. Partly because I think we're trying to define the activity while doing the activity, and that's always really strugglesome for me, and I've said that about a million times probably, that I think we need to have more context ahead of doing the activity. So for instance, if core values are something we're assuming or that are understood, I think we need to see those somewhere, and we need to have those shown in relation to what we're doing here so that we're able to understand, oh, okay, we all agree on these core values. Cool, this is how they're working with these priorities. Right now we're inside the priorities bubble and we're not seeing the other things. So a lot of my questions are probably answered by core values. At the end of the day, I think that a lot of this does come down to language. I'm not going to sit and go through examples right now, but a lot of it does come down to that, and I understand what's going to be happening is we'll be getting some information back from staff and then, you know, looking at this more closely. But at the end of the day, again, I'm sorry to keep saying at the end of the day, I'll stop saying it. What I mean to say is that we live with the language. That's what we live with. This isn't a series of pictures. These are words, they're written down, and we're meant to mobilize. Staff's meant to act on those words. And if they don't have a resonance and a clarity, they just will not work. We will not succeed. And so I want to say that I do think wordsmithing is really, really important, and the language we settle on will define the success of any of this stuff. I also just want to throw out there that I think some of the things we're doing are very detailed, actually. Contrary to what the mayor said, we're not supposed to be down the details. Some of these things are extraordinarily detailed, and some are not. I understand the difference between quantitative and qualitative, but even some qualitative things are undetailed here, right? And we have the information, and we have the quantitative information to make more detailed decisions. And the question for me is, what's the issue we're trying to address? How do we define that issue? Because it seems like a lot of these are responding to what I would consider to be an absent issue, right? So like some of these things are clearly trying to respond to a problem we all like assume in reading it, but it's not defined. So what's it we're trying to address here by setting a priority? What are we doing about it, and then how? And again, it doesn't have to be so granular that it becomes operational. But I think at a basic level, a lot of this is missing either one of those three things, right? It's missing either what the issue is that we're trying to tackle here, or it's missing what we're going to do about it, or it's missing how we're going to do that. And so I think as this evolves, I think those are the really most important things for me. At this point, I don't have much to say. I feel like these are all in various states of draft on the way to a final decision. But for me to understand them, I would have to ask so many questions and take up a lot of our time here today, which I'm not going to do. So I just wanted to offer that feedback that I think there are some things here that are great. The only example I'll give is the budget process. So when we look at the budget process there, I disagree with some of the minor items there and think we could just could maybe be a little more clear. For instance, a great example is shifts timing of budget approval from early Q2 to mid Q1 annually. Firstly, that's so specific and detailed. Also, it's very vague. So what I mean by that is, what's the problem we're trying to solve there? Because it seems like what's happening if I read that is we're trying to speed the budget process up, right? That's not what I necessarily heard from colleagues. What I heard were a couple different things. One, it takes a long time, but two, there's a lot of meetings. Does that actually address the issue of there being lots and lots of meetings? Does that address the issue of us, what is it address, what issue is it addressing exactly? I don't know. It's not here. And so I think when we understand those things a bit better or collectively agree on what the issue is, then it'll make it a little bit easier for us to do it. I'm just saying I think it's possible actually for us as a team of 16 people to come up with the answer to those questions. I don't think it's beyond us. I don't think it's operational. I think it's achievable. So that's what I'm kind of looking for in the end here, is something that I can really clearly understand, those three components, and be able to, when I talk to residents, explain to them what's going on. Because they're going to ask me questions like, well, what's that mean, Councillor? I have to have an answer. I have to be able to tell them in the plainest way what it means. So I think it's important for us as we go along this to make sure that the understanding piece is there, that we are able to participate in better understanding what these things mean. And that's where my comments will stand for now. I really agree with Councillor Nan, though. I think that when I saw this, the big thing missing for me was things like things related to equity, things related to inclusion. And if we're going to be having those core values, I think we need to articulate those two. Thank you.
Right.
Thanks, Councillor Kretsch. Councillor Alex Wilson, please.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor, happy to be here today having these conversations, and I just echoing the past couple of speakers, heard just like an accessibility flag, frankly, in the process, and just want to share that I've also shared that this has been at times a confusing process to navigate in terms of making sure we're all on the same page about what we're doing. So just want to put that out there as well. But with this in front of us, I come back to this clarity piece of what are the problems we're trying to solve? And maybe that comes into the language that we'll workshop later, but I go to the first priority, and what I remember in terms of the problem articulation phase was we have deferred maintenance. We have a difficult financial situation we're in our city, and that's something many of us as new folks are coming into and have to explain to the public. We also know that the way that we've been managing our green spaces, doing economic development, has furthered some of these crises and not made them better. Moving forward, we're trying to align these two independent priorities, being more sustainable in terms of our relationship with the natural environment and our economy, because we see them as fundamentally linked, and we're trying to undo that decision making. So that's what I took away from past priority sessions as the raison d'etre to this first bucket, was we're trying to have a new way forward that aligns these two things together. And then I see some of the targets, and I'm personally not seeing how that lines up with the feedback that was provided or the problem articulation. So for example, at no point in any of the sessions did I hear anyone bring up our corporate climate change target, something that makes up an infinitesimally small percentage of the carbon emissions in this city. I heard folks saying they want to have action on the crisis because it has that impact on the livability, that other priority we had earlier. And so for me, I'm wondering, how do these pieces we have here, these actions, do they still match up to the original intention behind these priorities? There are times when I think we do, and there are times when I struggle a little bit. And so that's my one kind of, I guess, comment or concern for some of the under priority one pieces. So specific examples are, I agree, we definitely want to be raising revenue. I heard that very clearly. We want to be shifting it off the taxpayer. One of those ways, or the residential taxpayer, one of those ways is to build more commercial and industrial. That is one way to do it. But there was other ways articulated throughout the process, other metrics that councillors brought up. I know, for example, I brought up the recirculation rate, which some municipalities have studied. So you can compare the relative value of investing in local business A versus international business B, how much money stays in the local community. We also need that number to make better decisions. And so my understanding of this kind of first piece was, we want to shift that burden so we can make better decisions. What are the metrics we need to make those decisions? I'm curious as to why this is the sole metric that makes it in, or what are some of those other metrics we need? And I think I just do want to draw attention to, I'm confused about who's defining what achievable is and what possible is. Because I go back to Councillor Nan's comments about housing. And I know that if we're defining the goal about reducing the number of folks who are actively houseless or have been forcibly evicted increasingly, that is a provincial policy matter, actually. Like, we can control the number of supportive units there are, we can control all these things, but we cannot control the flux of people being evicted. So that is 100% out of our control. But then I see in the climate change department, we're only focusing on our corporate emissions, presumably because that's something that is within our control.
Right.
Despite the fact that we have a climate action plan that talks about our buildings, our transit, where we have goals, community-wide goals there. And so I get a little confused because I see different decisions being made at different points. And that kind of goes to the how to participate effectively in this process. So I think the three things I just kind of like to re-hit as I'm closing my remarks, welcome any thought, is really, really hope that clarity, particularly clarity to the public, avoiding use of jargon, focusing really on what is the problem we're trying to solve and how will these actions solve the problem, as well as I'm also looking for clarity on what does achievable mean. Are we only focusing on things 100% in municipal control, or do we have whole of community approaches? And when are we making those decisions about when we're going to set a goal that we have to walk with residents on or other levels of government on, and when are we setting a goal that is 100% in-house?
Thanks for that. Anil, I don't know if you have any comments to make?
Through you, the Mayor. So very, very good points that have been raised here. In setting these targets, certainly lots and lots of conversation, and there was absolutely no one perfect way of doing it. What we attempted to do was look at what is in control, within control, or rather the word I often use is that we had adequate influence on, okay? Because we can influence people, we can influence things around us, but complete control, there's very little that we actually have complete control over. Target setting was an iterative process. We looked at current motions, we looked at current strategies, we gathered input from SLT, got their point of view as well. We looked at the input that we had received from all the councillors, and we attempted to align those targets based on, so what is achievable in terms of what is already in plans and what the long-term view in terms of approved priorities, improved plans, strategies are. And so that is how we attempted to do this, okay?
Councillor Wilson?
Just a quick follow-up is, and the reason I'm not understanding is not because I'm not trying to be deliberative or anything, where is our climate action strategy beyond our corporate, because we have a climate action strategy that is for, and I'm hearing that, no, we looked at these things, they are a part of it, and I guess just specifically under the climate change bucket,
right.
Our strategy is not there, it's in name only, and so I guess I'm wondering, just not as a critical piece, but just really trying to understand what did that process look like when we were thinking about it.
Yep. Through the Mayor, so just on that one, for instance, we did look at, there is a strategy which talks about community, the hub, I think it was called the decarbonization hub, yes. That work is already, so there is work underway there, right?
If I can, one of the things that we said from day one was that we have a lot of plans. We have a lot of great plans, but we have to start working the plans. And so none of this says we're going to stop working those plans. And as if folks might remember, we had those conversations in the larger groups that when we got together that talked about the fact that a lot of what the corporation is doing is going to continue to function. Like we're not going to suddenly abandon the climate action plan. We're not going to suddenly abandon the decisions made around bike lanes. In fact, that's a little bit referred to in here, so that might be a bad example. We're never going to abandon the idea, the values that we hold as human beings, that every single person in our city needs to be housed. Finland did it in 10 years. This is about what's happening in the next 3.5 years. And there's a couple of pieces. One is all of those great plans that corporately exist are still going to be, we're going to still be working on them, but staff are going to come back, as you've seen in this document and the presentation, rather, with you know, what is the balancing act of continuing to do some of the great work that's already underway and actually achieving some things in the next 3.5 years that we can point to that actually push us along. Without that kind of focus and without that kind of determination, we'll continue to have great plans, And everybody will be throwing stuff on the table, and staff will be scrambling to figure out what to prioritize, and who has the, you know, the biggest influence on whether or not this or that gets prioritized, but that is not what we should be doing as a corporation, as an organization that's trying to deliver for the people of Hamilton. And that's why we went through this process in the first place. Yes, there can be some, obviously some tweaking, and there will be reports back where we might say, you know, this is great, follows what we wanted to see in terms of action, but go back on this piece because I don't think it's quite there. That's not right now, but that's certainly our responsibility as governors as we go forward to do that kind of work. But without priorities, we get nowhere. And so what this attempt was is to set out some priorities that are big picture, but in some instances a little bit more detailed, to give the staff a clear sense of what this term of council, the next 3.5 years, not a long time, is concerned about and wanting to focus on in terms of delivering for the community. So I don't know if that's helpful, but it goes back to the whole idea that it's not going to be perfect, and we will tweak it along the way. But big picture, that's what governance is all about. It's about, here are, if you want to call them the buckets, and here are some of the, excuse me, the strategies that we see will have impact on moving those buckets forward, and here are some of the tactics that we identified already that we think will help measure some of that, and staff will be coming back with more measurements as well as recommendations around corporate capacity to actually undertake the activities. So I don't know if that's helpful, Councillor Wilson, but that's kind of organizationally and kind of governance-wise the way I believe we need to move forward.
That was very helpful, and I just want to say I very much agree with everything you're saying. I 100% do. I think my question just remains is we have these plans. To me, it looks like we've picked a part of one of the plans. It doesn't have to be today. I'm flagging that I don't understand why we've picked one piece of our climate action strategy and not the other actions when we do talk about cycling lanes either. So we don't have to keep going there. I just, from the perspective of trying to provide general feedback today, that is my general feedback is,
Sure.
Do these things still align with the original reason behind the priority, or has achievability of the target maybe influenced, or like, and let's just make sure we're still on the track, because yes, achievable, and that may change what we originally started to do, but do they still match up with each other? And that's my, I guess, prompt the room or my question, and thank you.
No, it's a really good point. And if you remember, we did that brainstorming session where we had a gajillion things. It was a lot of good work, a gajillion things, but you can't have a gajillion things. You got to boil it down to some actionable things that we can start moving on. Otherwise, again, we'll have lots of plans. We plan the work, but we never get around to working the plan. And that's not, I don't want to say that that's where we are necessarily now, but as a council, it's our job to identify the work that we want to get done in these next 3.5 years. Anil?
Thank you.
No? Okay, just so folks know, Councillor Kassar. Oh, Lisa? Sure. Go ahead, Lisa.
If I may, through the mayor, I just want to highlight too that the outcomes are kind of those broader, bigger picture themes that we heard through a lot of the sessions. So looking at the climate change, the decarbonization progress, that's the outcome throughout the city. And this is where you'll see reference to the climate action strategy. There's a lot of different things in that climate action strategy that are going towards the achievement of that actual outcome that we've identified through this process. But what we had done in identifying the measures of success was clearly picking out something that staff had the ability to really influence over the remainder of your term of council. But you'll continue to hear about all the other different pieces that will come through the climate action strategy, the other related strategies that go towards that outcome. So that's why we've separated out in terms of the council priorities, the council outcomes where we really saw a lot of that alignment, and then the measures of success are those few things that we're able to very tangibly show progress on, so at the end of the term of council, you'll know exactly what we achieved, if that helps.
Thanks, Lisa. Okay, so just to let folks know, we have Councillor Kassar, Councillor Clark, Councillor Danko, Councillor Pauls, Councillor McMeekin. Councillor Kassar, please.
Thanks, Mayor Horvath, and I just wanted to support what Lisa was saying there. I think that's the struggle that some of us might be having, I certainly have as well, is this is about 3.5 years. There are plans that will go beyond that, and it's about figuring out what we can achieve now versus what's going to continue. And I think as we are going about the communication process of this, we need to figure out a way to put those together, because it doesn't mean that we're forgetting about operations or the climate action plan. So that's a communication exercise. So just wanted to mention that. I'd also like to address the sustainable economic and ecological development, the first priority, which I agree with all the priorities. I wanted to make a constructive suggestion for the increased non-residential growth rate. Absolutely agree and support that we need to remove the burden of taxes from residential property taxpayers. I mean, I think that's what we all agree on here, and that's what this is about. I'm going to suggest that 1.4 million square feet and $500 million in construction value is not the high-level objective we should be aiming for. I think that is a sub-point, and that's going to enable things. But there are ways that achieving those things could not help relieve the residential property taxpayers' burden. If there are, grants, property tax grants, or it's done in a way that facilitates more infrastructure is required and increases taxes. So there's a way to do it properly. But what I would like that sub-priority to say, instead of increased non-residential tax or non-residential growth rate, is reduce the tax burden on the residential property taxpayer. And the wording I would suggest, put forth for consideration, instead of listing the metrics there, is review and adjust our planning and economic development processes to increase the tax productivity of land within the municipality with the specific outcome to reduce the tax burden on residential taxpayers. What I think that does is it takes it up a level. It enables that specific objective as written, but also enables many more. For example, residential infill development. Other considerations, we talked about development charge exemptions or not, and other things that aren't coming to mind right now. I think what that would do would enable, I think, the spirit of what we heard back in May to reduce the burden on residential taxpayers and allow us to get some more tools out of the toolbox rather than just one specific one, which was pointed out previously, just kind of narrows into a limited number of things. So I would put that out there as a suggestion.
Can you provide that to clerks? It sounds like a kind of a friendly amendment. It's more kind of
I will certainly
bigger
do that.
picture, but maybe if you could provide that, then we'll go back at the end.
Thank you.
Anil, did you have anything to comment on that?
No, through the mayor, no, I think at this time I'll hold off. I need to put a little bit more thought into that. Because I did, maybe the one thing that I need to go back to my notes and consider here is the growth rate and the economic development. There was a theme there around job creation and wealth creation for city as well, which increasing non-commercial industrial construction does both tax impact as well as job and economy and all of that impact. So that's the only one thing that immediately comes to the top of mind. I need to go back to my notes probably on that.
Yep, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Did you have anything else, Councillor Passar? Okay. Councillor Clark, please.
Good morning, Mayor. Just a few questions. So if I understand this correctly, these are to be the council priorities and goals for the next 4 years, roughly 3.5 years left. I don't see anything in terms of how we fund these priorities. And my concern is that, in essence, they are unfunded priorities. And earlier in your presentation, and I listened carefully, you indicated that there would be a need to rationalize current work plans and priorities versus these new priorities because we can't feasibly do all of that. I'm paraphrasing. Did I capture that accurately?
Anil?
Through the mayor, I think that is accurate. At the same time, Councillor, I think we attempted to align many of these goals with existing strategies that have already been approved, and therefore some of this is funded. But then some of the other pieces we talked about, next steps, which is about enablement, was about how do we free up both resources and funds where possible to direct them towards this.
And I guess when I'm looking at the priorities, and you're correct, many of these are already in work plans or partially in work plans. What we are doing is accelerating goals and objectives, and there will be a cost. We don't have that. So I just need to put that on the table here. I've not seen anything in here as to what the budget implications would be to accelerating these priorities and goals, and how would we pay for those accelerated goals. When it comes to Madam Mayor, and I'm struggling to understand how we came to setting the goals. For example, we have a goal with regards to the climate change action plan goal of 50% reduction in total corporate greenhouse gas emissions by 2030. We're now changing that to 55% by 2026. I don't know if that's achievable. You've said numerous times all of these things are achievable. I guess they're achievable if we fund them in the manner to achieve them. But these are our, they're not aspirational goals. We're putting them on documents here where we are going to do this if we approve this. Correct?
Neil?
Through the mayor, these goals, yes, this is our collective aspiration. This is what we are targeting to do. How we do this and how this is going to be funded is next steps. The reason why we have kept budget and cost implications of all of these off for now is because the work plans first need to be developed. Otherwise, it becomes a matter of just a number, but a work plan that'll help us achieve that target, then what resources is needed, what capability is needed, what funds are needed. All of that will be done in advance of the 2024 budget process. So that timeline aligns with the next budget cycle.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Mayor. I sincerely do. When we talk about the protection of green spaces and water, we indicate increase in publicly owned natural areas. Are we discussing municipally owned or publicly owned? Because if you're talking publicly owned, you're talking HCA, school board, and all the other agencies that are receiving funds and own land. If we're talking about our parks, then it should be municipally owned.
Anil?
To the mayor, I believe it was municipally owned. I'll maybe ask for input from Lisa as well.
Yeah, I'm going to ask Carlisle. Sorry.
Through the chair, Carlisle Ken, Director of Public Works, General Manager of Public Works. I believe the intent there is that parks and open spaces are municipally owned assets within our portfolio.
So I would suggest just a friendly amendment so that we have the right nomenclature, because Councillor Crutch is correct. Words mean a lot. And 3 years from now, we're going to be looking back and arguing, no, that's not what that meant. So we need to make it as clear as possible. When it comes to the increase in housing units for all and reduce homelessness, I am struggling. The approval of 20,000 new housing units by the end of 2026. If I'm not mistaken, we've been approving about 3,000, 3,500 a year. That's quite a jump. And I don't know whether or not that is attainable, and only our staff can indicate that. But some of the language in there, I'm trying to understand. It says to preserve and maintain affordable rental stock in the private market. I'm not sure how we do that as a municipality. It's the private market. without adding additional incentives, I'm not sure how we do that. And then when we're talking about affordable or permanently supportive housing units, I don't see geared to income housing in there. And in the public right now, there seems to be confusion as to what affordable means, because everybody's using it now. I have developers trying to tell me that their new condos that they're building on an 8-story building on Paramount are going to be affordable, but they're going to be market. And so in today's market, they're not affordable by definition, but they're using that language and it's really confusing people. And so I just raised that. I'm not trying to be disparaging.
Can I just, before you go on to the next ones, if you don't mind, Councillor Clark, some of these things were addressed in the housing sustainability and investment roadmap. So some of these concepts came from there. If you look at kind of market rent, what we see is affordable rental housing being lost. Again, it's been in the reports from GM Burden's team. We saw a unique or creative solution that was brought forward, still not over the finish line. For example, the co-op model that Councillor Kretsch has been dealing with. We've heard that we have existing affordable rental stock that can be, torn down and turned into condos, or can be, or can just be evict everybody and convert it to condos. And so we've talked about things like the Airbnb issue. We've talked about, issues around vacant units, and all of those pieces are part of some of the solutions that we've already talked about to try to preserve market rent. So it's not a matter of affordable market rents, sorry. So I don't know if that helps at all, but it's a huge basket. Some of these things we're already doing, but identifying that we need to continue to do these kinds of pieces and set some targets on what our expectations are. We know that, for example, some providers of affordable social housing, particularly when their federal and provincial grant agreements or mortgage agreements have expired, we've lost some of those units. That was also in a report from GM Burden's group. We know we need affordable housing. We should be putting everything in place that we can to prevent those RGI units from being lost to accessibility from our residents of the city of Hamilton who need that. You heard from the folks from McMaster. I don't have them off the top of my head right now, but there's a lot of work being done on what are the solutions to help us to maintain the stock that we have in the private market, retain and increase the stock that we have in terms of social housing. Some of that absolutely other orders of government can help us with, but some of that we might be able to control ourselves. And so I don't know if you want some further kind of detail from GM Burden, but those are some of the things I think that we're already kind of looking at. We have a housing secretariat that we've put in place. It's about empowering that housing secretariat to find those solutions. We have to identify what we want to see, and then the staff go off and put together plans to make that work happen.
I am aware of everything that you just said. The challenge is the majority of it is under provincial control. And that's where we get really stuck. Condos are under provincial acts. You talk about the renovictions, it's under provincial authority. And so we are fighting a rear guard battle against the loss of housing in a capitalist market without the tools to help folks find geared to income housing. And that's the real challenge. And we can't pick up responsibilities that are other provincial responsibilities. And I don't know how we push back on the loss of rental stock. We've talked about it. We've pushed it to the province. But if a property owner is going to sell their apartment building for condos and renovate it into condos, they're doing it because they're going to make top dollar in this marketplace. And we don't have the tools to prevent that. And so those are some of my concerns. I guess the last question I have is how do we engage the public on this very serious document? So we talk about improved public engagement, but I do not know if there are plans to hear from the public on these proposed priorities and how we're going to do that. Because if we my concern is that there are an awful lot of residents that are struggling to pay their taxes now. And if we increase the taxes significantly to do all of these new unfunded priorities, we're going to find taxpayers in a revolt. We need to do, as Anil has indicated, look at other programming and start rationalizing. If you're going to spend millions over here, do we need to continue spending this money over here? And that's the only way to find the balance that is going to bring residents along with us on this ride. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Anil, did you want to respond?
To the mayor, no, I think that's a valid point. We have, as next steps, certainly engagement with and communication out to the residents as a next step. These were, in building these priorities, we gathered input from all members of council as well as looked at our city survey. And through that, we believe that we have captured the essence of the key priorities for the citizens of Hamilton. As we go out and communicate, there will obviously be input that we will continue to receive 3.5 years. There's going to be continued tweak and alignment as priorities shift, as needs shift. And so that certainly should be, is going to be part of the engagement plan.
Thanks, Neil. Councillor Janko, please.
Thank you, Mayor. A couple comments and then I have one question at the end. First of all, I'd really like to thank you, as this is your initiative, for setting this up and bringing us together today with a focused set of priorities. Thank the councillors that worked on this. It was no small work just on the back end, capturing all those discussions, and especially Anil and our consultants for facilitating all this work. Clearly, this is something that would have been impossible for us to do in-house, and I'm really amazed at that we are able so quickly to come to such a concise list of priorities for our city, and I really appreciate that work. I think it says a lot about everything that went on behind the scenes. So personally, I'm really excited about what we have before us today, because I think it provides us as a council with a focus for this term, a focus for our staff, and a focus for us as a council. My observations this term is, if I could use one word to describe this term so far, I'd say it's been disjointed. Just my personal observation is, up until this point, it seems that we have a lot of individuals inserting their individual priorities, and we haven't been able to really achieve as a team, as a council, what our combined priorities are. So I think, you know, Anil, you described it as our collective aspirations, and I think that's what we have before us today. And I think it's just important to put into context. I'm a little bit surprised about the negativity this morning, because, I mean, we have a one-page summary that is, you know, outlining the whole of months of discussions with councillors, with 16 individuals, plus the whole of all of our existing city priorities, policies, and things that are already happening. So just to you know, a little bit of perspective perhaps is necessary. Overall, the thing that I think that is the most positive and is the most exciting today is that most of this we are aligned on as a council, as a mayor, as our staff, and as residents. And that's fantastic. That's something that we should be celebrating. Are there things in here that I think, you know, could be a little bit different? You know, if I was to inject my personal, you know, priorities in there, sure. But as a whole, this is our collective vision for what we want to achieve for the next 3 years. So my only question, and it was raised in the presentation about the need for the role of the gatekeeper in order to keep this online or on track. And you've taken on that role a little bit in the last, as necessity has dictated, to try to focus our direction as a council. So I'm wondering through you, if that role of a gatekeeper, is that in a collective as a council that we will try to keep in line with our priorities? Is that an individual? Is that through the mayor's office, the clerk's office, the city manager's office? How do we envision that, keeping us on track?
Thanks, Councillor Danko. Did you want to address that, Anil, or do you want me to go for it? Why don't you start, and then I can...
Sure, through the mayor. Thank you, Councillor. I believe the role of the gatekeeper is a critical one. Personally, I also believe that the best way that a gatekeeper would work is for us to take collective accountability, which I'm using these two words, which are diametrically opposite. Accountability is by person. One person has got to be accountable, and yet I'm saying we take a collective accountability. Because as a unified council, as we come to common ground, for us to help each other and work with each other and guide each other in that role of a gatekeeper would be ideal. Ultimately, though, I do believe that as the leader of the council, my personal opinion, Madam Mayor, with all due respect, I believe this is something that the mayor should lead on behalf of the council, and potentially the city manager should lead on behalf of the staff of the city.
I don't disagree with that, and I would say that there's, I think that we have a good environment of collaboration, of discussing things, of trying to find the common ground and the trust. But when we have a roadmap or when we have priorities set, it takes all of us to self-discipline, right? So you're not throwing all kinds of things on the table constantly. We're referring back to what our priorities are. Does that mean things are not going to come up? Absolutely. As Anil said, things will come up. Does that mean that there aren't going to be tweaks because for some reason something that we set as a priority is not going to be achievable or needs to be adjusted because other orders of government maybe have suddenly decided they're going to come on board, and so we can increase our goals or our achievement, our targets? Absolutely. But in the kind of the focus to get to a place where we can deliver on priorities, we have to have some discipline. And it's not a nice word, but anybody who's a parent knows that it's required. Organizationally, it's required as well. It's required in your personal achievements as well, as people know. Discipline is extremely important. And so finding a path forward that creates that space, creates that flexibility, maintains the kind of the trust, if you will. It takes self-discipline, it takes organizational discipline, and it takes governance discipline.
Thank you. Discipline and collective focus. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Okay, Councillor Pauls, please.
Thank you. And thank you, Anil. This is the things you said at the beginning, that this needs to be practical and realistic. And that stood in my mind, realistic. And yesterday, I was out, and there were a couple of hundred people around me. Believe it or not, playing pickleball is a big thing now. And I had people come up to me so upset about their taxes. And I said, we could have been higher. And I remember you, Mayor, coming saying, we found a little bit of money and we could reduce it a little bit. This is a real issue. And when I see words like accelerate the city current climate change action plan goal to 50 reduction in total corporate greenhouse gas emission from 2005 to 2030 to achieve 55 reduction by the end of 2026. This is a great goal, but is it realistic? And I'm thinking, I remember Linda Lasa came and spoke to us, and she said something that there's going to be a budget for it. There's going to be a budget for climate change that we need to sacrifice. And what people were telling me yesterday, and does the public know the sacrifice that we want to impose on them? Do they know that? And I find it really, and then you turn another thing about the one that says more than double the pace, remember, double the pace of construction of new and upgraded active transportation facility, separated bike lane, connection bike lanes, and paved multi-use pathway from approximately 15 kilometers per year to 40. That's almost, 3.5 times more. And I love bike lanes. I bike a lot. It's not that I don't, but is this realistic? And when we're telling the public, we have a goal. We have set priorities, and we don't engage in them. We don't tell them why their taxes are going to go up. Next year, I said maybe they're going to be 10% next year. I have no idea. We have a responsibility, and when we are trying to be transparent, I don't think we are when we are not communicating with the public what our priorities are. Listen, I understand climate change, we know, but I want to tell you something. When you train for an Ironman or whatever, you take little steps, because I could not do an Ironman today. I would have to practice over a year. Little by little, you accomplish things. And you may say, oh, it's emergency, it's right now. Well, I'll tell you, people want to know where their taxes. When people were approaching me, as the city increased my services, can you name me one service that they increased? I had a hard time to figure it out what increases we did. We did hire more people. By Law 16, we hired people, but I had a hard time. And I want to say this. I applaud everyone here. I think it's great when we talk to the mayor about priorities. You know what I thought? It's my Ward 7. They want better parks. They want their swing set, their play area better. Those are the priorities they want. They want roads fixed. There's potholes. We have a road on Upper Wellington there that's been built for so long that it needs to be redone. Those are the priorities I thought we were going to, but it has shifted, and the priority of housing is number one, in my opinion, but we have shifted all of a sudden to what sacrifice are we willing to do? So if we want to ask the public, I am all for it. What sacrifice will you take in order to do all these priorities? The bike lane, I voted actually no for that, but approve the budget, because we need that connectivity. But in 3 years, think about it. 15 kilometers, now we're going to do 40 kilometers. Where's the money going? Please, let's get the public involved. We set priorities, but the publics are the taxpayers, so am I. So that's my comment, and when Councillor Clark was talking, I thought, that's right on. Where are we getting the money? That's right on. I was going to say the same thing. So, Mayor, again, I want to thank you for this opportunity to get together to talk about what our priorities are, but then let's bring the public with us so that they know, so they don't swarm around you and say, hey, what have you done? And we could answer with truthful and say, look, we're doing this, this, and that. So that's my comment. And my question was, how are we going to communicate with the public?
Thanks, Councillor Pauls. I don't know, Anil, if you have any response, but...
Through the mayor, maybe. So thank you very much for those comments, Councillor. Through this process, as we deliberated and identified outcomes of success, outcomes and measures of success, the intention was to be able to clearly measure progress in key areas. So have we directly involved the public in this process? Separately for this initiative, I will say probably not. However, through the council and the individual inputs that we got from all members of council at several points in this process, as well as Our City survey, as well as looking at our strategic plans for the city, as well as looking at key indicators for what is happening, the urgent issues, the important issues. I believe we did capture the key essence, the key themes that are on people's minds today. So I think we should keep that in mind. When we look at this, personally, when I step back and look at this document and I look at all the input that we received and we reviewed in the past 5 months, I felt that this document captured the key themes. Not 100%, but key themes. Step 4 in the prioritization roadmap was about organizational enablement, the organizational capability. We brought this up in the very first meeting that we had on priority setting. Prioritization is about choosing to do a few things, focus on a few key things, move the ball forward in those areas by a few yards rather than just a few inches. Right? That was the purpose of this. Is there going to be additional conversation required on funding, on budgeting, on all of that? Absolutely needs to happen, right? And therefore, I go back to my earlier opening comment. Prioritization and strategy cannot be and should not be a static one-time document. This is not written in stone, should not be written in stone. Because if it is written in stone, I don't need governance around it. Okay. This is and should be a living document, one that we will review, and hence the need for my recommendation on quarterly, make changes as needed, amend targets as needed, rethink strategies. Looking into the future is always a hypothesis. Who could have predicted COVID? Who could have predicted inflation? Who could have predicted, and how can we predict? Sitting here today with all the information and knowledge that we have in this world, can we truly predict what will happen in the next 3.5 years? This document, I believe, brings together all the information that we had, the facts that we had, the opinion that we had, the perspectives that we had, and we've taken a stand. Is this perfect? For sure not. Is further refinement required? Absolutely. But without this, we will not have a starting point.
Thanks, Anil. I just wanted to add that early on we had the conversation about these being priorities that we were going to try to establish that we could put extra effort to. Not to say that roads won't get paved or that parks won't get their garbage cleaned out of them or that things won't happen that are the everyday organizational responsibility of the City of Hamilton. Those things happen. They're going to continue to happen. But what this says is in the next 3.5 years, what can we put some extra focus on? So folks might forget that that was the conversation that we had at the beginning, but it's scary. We don't want people to think we're suddenly not going to do some of the fundamental basics that a city is supposed to do to meet the needs of the people who live in that city. But we also have 3.5 years to tackle some of the big picture things, and I think that that's what this actually does, that what these priorities help to try to get us to do. I would also say that that when you don't have that kind of discipline, then that's what happens. All kinds of things come up and nobody has any focus and nobody has any, line of sight as to what we're trying to achieve over the next couple of years. And that's what we want to avoid. We want to be able to say to the people of Hamilton, here's what we are planning to do, here's what we've been able to do, here's how we've measured it, and here's the difference it's made in our communities. It's made a difference in terms of our sustainability and development, or as Councillor Cassar said, perhaps it's made a difference in terms of reducing the tax burden on non-residential taxpayers when it comes to development. for example. We've made a difference when it comes to safe and thriving neighborhoods. Or we've made a difference when it comes to working at City Hall and transparency of municipal government. And so I think there's a couple of pieces, and Anil also spoke to them, which is they are fundamentals that the city is doing and will continue to do. These are kind of places where we will put extra focus, extra effort, but there are also things that perhaps are eating up resources that are no longer valuable in this 2023 to 2026 period. So part of the job that we're giving our senior staff is to identify those things for us, because what that does is it eats up resources that could be going to, for example, potholes, or could be going to, for example, okay, well, I can't get one. achieving Vision Zero annually. Do you know what I mean? And so it's a matter of saying we have this point in time. People have brought us here. I'm going to say this. We were elected as a change council. So we can do things the way we've always done them as a city of Hamilton. The council can operate in the way that it always has. I think that we can do better than that. But the way you do better is by focusing and disciplining. And again, that's up to this body to determine. I, as the mayor, I was excited. I still am. We have an energetic council. We have a new council, lots of turnover. The ability to kind of turn a ship doesn't happen very often. And what we heard from voters, what I heard from voters, is that they want to have the ship turning a bit. It's the way things have been done was effective in many ways, but they want something a little bit different this time. So it's our job. It's our job to do things a little bit differently. And I would submit that that's why I wanted to start this process, to have these conversations, to have them, without the staff, not for any reason in terms of and any negative reason, but to give us a chance, us, the governors, the board of directors of this corporation, to have those conversations and figure out, can we? I think, yes, we can. To use a phrase, I think, yes, we can, and I'm excited to try. And so I'm going to just leave it at that, but I do want to assure you that my intention, we all know what the average household income is for the city of Hamilton. We all know that. It's not news to us. And so we also know that we have responsibilities in terms of our fiscal kind of situation and what we can and can't do in asking for huge increases in taxes. Does that mean that we can actually move the city forward without any resources? That doesn't mean that. Where we find the resources, some will come from taxes. They have to. But some will also come from other fees and other opportunities, as discussed in terms of the development goals. Some of them will come from rearranging of existing use of our resources. Some things, as I said already, I'm not going to repeat, we might not be doing anymore or not be doing as much of anymore. These are courageous steps, I have to say, especially for returning councillors and people who have been making decisions around this table for a long time or for some time. It's not easy. They're challenging steps. They're doing things differently. It's scary in some ways, perhaps. I guess the question I've asked myself and that I would ask you to ask yourselves is, are we ready to make that kind of a move? And if we are, then we have to trust each other, we have to work together, and we're not, it's never going to be perfect, as Anil said, but it will change the ethos of our organization, the way that we do things, which is something kind of big picture that we all heard, but it's kind of like, well, how do you actually do that? We hear words like culture, change, and all of these things. Part of the culture comes from the way that the organization is governed and by the way that the decisions are being made and by the interface of the governance side with the administrative side and with the I'm sorry, I'm going to use the word the customer side, but in all of those different realms when we talked about who it is that we're serving internally and externally. So on that note, I'm sorry if I went on too long, but I want you to know as mayor, those issues that you've raised, that Councillor Clark has raised, that others I know are really concerned about, I'm concerned about too. We do know what the demographics, the aging demographics, in fact, of our community, and also the capacity, the financial capacity of our residents, absolutely. Okay, on that note, Councillor McMeekin, please.
Well, following you, Madam Mayor, is kind of like trying to dance after Karen Kane, I think. Thank you. I want to begin by thanking the mayors for her leadership as well. I think this is a good start, very good start. And it's about choices, you know, the choice between good and bad is easy. We all want to be on the side of the angels, right? It's decisions between competing goods that are tough, and that's where the rock hits the road or whatever. The simple truth is we campaign in poetry, but we've got to govern in prose. And that said, and I think maybe you alluded to it, Your Worship, there's a big difference between a great plan and an implementable great plan. And that has to do with focus and priorities and extorting the collective wisdom of the horseshoe. There's a lot of wisdom around this table. It comes to me frequently that none of us is as smart as all of us. You know, it may be frustrating to get where we need to go, but I think that's true. All of that's preamble to what I want to observe. You know, we've heard about core values, the importance. We've had some passing reference to engaging our constituents. Councillor Clark and Councillor Pauls and others have talked a bit about our fiscal responsibility with taxpayers. Someone said to me the other day up in my ward, I'll begin to take you folk seriously down there. When you set a target for a tax increase, he offered 4% as a target and cut the cloth to fit. And he then added, of course, I realized there were some exigencies around the provincial stuff, but it would be easier for taxpayers to understand if we knew that you were cutting the cloth to fit and that the other things that were added were beyond our control. And I think Councillor Clark referenced that very well. So that brings me to my three I think, important observations. One is this plan doesn't seem to say very much about partnerships. You know, the simple reality is we're the only level of government with our fiscal hands tied. We need and want to not just succeed, we want to thrive, but the only way we thrive is if we can in fact have a plan that buttresses collaboration. I think we need to focus much more attention, Your Worship, on building, as difficult as it may be, partnerships with the two senior levels of government. I know you're making some efforts there, not just senior levels of government. I think partnerships with our Indigenous brothers and sisters is something that is missing here. Maybe it ties into your point, Councillor Nan, about equity and diversity. Partnerships with housing developers. They're not all evil folk out there. There's some people want to help, you know, and some of us have had the privilege of working closely with developers with a heart who, if they could just get by, would want to build purpose-built housing. And certainly partnerships with our own communities, and rather than just the generic reference on consultation and engagement. So those are some things I offer. Fundamental to that is the reality that we can't do everything we want to do. We want to do more, but the only way we can do that is by accessing some of the tools that the good councillor from Ancaster mentioned, broadening our toolbox. And we do that by finding some creative entrepreneurial ways to partner, to surround ourselves with some more resources. And to do that, we've got to partner with the two senior levels of government, no doubt about it. I say this not in any mean-spirited way, but I think that's been a real weakness of municipalities generally, and something that we can learn from. Thanks.
Thanks, Councillor McMeekin. I don't know if that there's any particular response, except that not unlike other things that we talked about in terms of what the corporation's already doing as a entity to address the ongoing daily needs of residents, is that work is ongoing, and it continues to be both in all of the fronts that you talked about. So I appreciate you raising them. Councillor Maureen Wilson, please, for a second time.
Thank you, Mayor. I don't have any comments on the document, just comments, so at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Well, we have yourself and Councillor Kretsch for a second time, and we have a 12 o'clock, what do you call it, hard stop. So I would say that probably you should go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Horvath, for your work on this, and to the councillors. I think it was Councillor Wang, Councillor Spadafora, and Councillor Tedison. I'm sorry, Mark. I'm sorry for your work on this stage of the process. I am not going to comment on the specifics of this, but I think there's been some comments made about public engagement and public expectations and how are we going to pay for it. So I'd just like to say I try to continuously engage with the public about some of the challenges and opportunities. And if I took as a measure of my success the happiness I receive at the door every time a tax bill is received, I wouldn't be very happy, and my success rate would be very low. But to Ward 1, if you're listening, and I'd like to share with my colleagues, here is the narrative, and here's why priorities have to be set. We've been an amalgamated city for a little over 20 years. And where are we right now? And why are some of the things that have been said on this paper, such as asset management? Here's the narrative I offer at the door, Mayor, and to your point about this is a change. It was a change election. This is a change council. It has to exert some discipline. It has to provide some deliverables. We basically forfeited the last 20 years of good city building by underfinancing what are shared public assets. And now we're left in a bit of a pickle in that the cost to just get them online and serviceable, not even provide more, are well beyond our means right now. We have taken from some revenue sources, rainy day revenue sources in the form of the Hamilton Future Fund in order to deliver unreasonable tax rates, 1.3%, as an old industrial city, while our needs, whether they be people or whether they be infrastructure, are expanded, are aging, are in need of care. My frustration a little bit is that, to your point, Mayor Horvath, we have lots of plans. When I see those plans, to me, they are an expression of priority. They are an expression of need. They are an expression of direction. They are an expression of what we have to do in order to be ecologically sound, economically vibrant, a competitive community in terms of attracting and retaining young workers, and as a corporation. If I can take one example, or maybe many examples, we're realizing now the importance of asset management because our assets have been crumbling. We have been underinvesting in them. We are realizing now the importance of costs that are having to be borne on all of our residents, all of those costs. We're leaning into Vision Zero, not only for the health of our residents, but also because, like Montreal, that's where the market is going. That's where we need to go in order to attract young workers. When we sign up to all these policies, it is an expression already of direction. It therefore requires a different direction. I don't quite understand how we can support, sometimes unanimously, these policies and think we have to just do more of the same at the same rate. So if that is going to be the measure of this council, I will swim against that stream. I don't think that's why we're elected. I will continue to have very transparent, open conversations with Ward 1 residents of why we need to go in this direction, because I do think it's my responsibility. So thank you again for your leadership on this front.
Thanks, Councillor Wilson. Councillor Crutch, please.
Thanks. Thanks to Councillor Maureen Wilson. Said a couple of things that were on my mind. Yeah, I really think that as this meeting has gone on, it's been a little clearer to me what the goal is here, which is that the main sort of subtitles are what we're trying to get some consensus around, and that perhaps some of the outcomes that are underneath those subtitles are things that we can work on and get more direction on. And I'll be honest with you, had I heard that before now and we had that clear discussion before now, it would have been a lot easier for me to understand what the activity was and what we're trying to come together about. I don't think anyone here is looking for perfection. I think that's really important because I've heard that word used maybe 6 or 7 times today. It's like I think we're preoccupied by that for some reason. I'm curious who the audience for that might be. But I think that we have to be careful about how we talk about this, right? I don't think anyone here is looking for perfection. I also think that we all recognize, and I'm just going to say this out loud, that this is coming at a time where many of us have had to make decisions or had to put motions forward to do things that needed to be done that have been, as Councillor Maureen Wilson says, abandoned for decades, that needed to happen in the first 6 months of this term. And if we had priorities like on day one, then we would have been able to coalesce around them. So I think it's important that we have them now, and we can't wait and delay not to have council priorities going forward, because every month that passes by without them means that the burden is on us to come up with individual solutions. But that's not negative or bad. That's just the reality of the situation that we're in. I just want to acknowledge that that's where we're at, and that's okay. And I also think that when we have these discussions, we have to, some of us are very enthusiastic about some things. I'm enthusiastic about lots of things, but, it is hard for me as someone who's processing this information a bit differently and who didn't really understand the activity to be enthusiastic about it. Doesn't mean I'm not going to vote in favor. It doesn't mean I'm not going to support it. It doesn't mean I'm being negative either. I think we have to be able to talk about, as elected officials and governors, the struggles we have with these processes, how we go through making decisions. That's part of being transparent. I shouldn't be, sit here quietly and keep my feelings to myself just because they're not enthusiastic. That can't be the measure of good governance. That can't be the measure of why I sit in this chair. I have to be able to say things that make sense, and I think we have to be careful about how we use language to define how each other talks about these things. Speak about them however you want. That's your role here. And we all went and knocked on doors and talked to people and heard what they had to say. And we may have heard different things for all I know. I don't know, I wasn't at the door with all of you. But I come here and represent those things every day. And maybe it sounds like it's coming from, a certain place, but the place it's coming from is the conversations I have with people who live in Ward 2 and across the city. So that's what I'm always bringing to this discussion. I think it's important. And I do see that here lined up with the priorities. I do see that here. When I look at it in a broad way, and look at those kind of titles and things like that, they're on the broad level, I see lots of overlap and lots of things we agree with. So great, I'm glad we're open to wordsmithing and there'll be chances to tweak it along the way. I look forward to doing that work. I get that the frustration is there from the organization. We have these huge outstanding business lists for the public who may not know, and on them are lots of things that are kind of sat there from maybe last term, sometimes the term before that may not necessarily have been looked at. And so part of that process is doing this so we can clean up the cobwebs and move forward. And that's, I think, also a really good and important thing. I think also that, when we talked about having a gatekeeper, I think we have to be a little careful about that. I think the idea is a good idea in principle, but I think that when we use the word gatekeeper, that seems like us going backwards a bit, right, in terms of how we're looking at this. I think it would be a mistake to be like, oh, I've got to get that past the gatekeeper, otherwise it's not going to happen, right? And I think nobody really wants that. I think it's a fine way to approach the idea of having someone there to build consensus, but I'd hate it if it was a swinging gate that opened and closed, right? right? So just want to throw that out there. Otherwise, thanks for this work and thanks for the process. I think we can get behind this today and move it forward. I mean, from my perspective anyways, I can say that, and, see a lot of commonality here. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Councillor Kretsch. We have Councillor Clark for the second time, and then I'd like to actually follow up on some, just the way that one thing is worded, if you don't mind. Councillor Huang, please. Oh, sorry, Councillor Clark, please. Sorry.
Thank you, Mayor, and I have enjoyed and found it enlightening, the debate around the table this morning. We need to keep things in context when we're talking about asset management. It wasn't just the city of Hamilton that was struggling with no asset management plan. It was every municipality in the province of Ontario. You know this, you were at Queen's Park. The province of Ontario brought the legislation in because municipalities were not setting aside the proper reserves. And that's what transpired over the last, I'd say, 20 some odd years. And the city of Hamilton was pushing for a better asset management plan. I remember my first day when I was here trying to understand how much road we have, how much, just basic questions in terms of our assets, and they didn't have answers. They had never valued the roads. They had never valued our municipal assets. They couldn't tell us how much municipal assets we had, and nor could they tell us how far behind we were in maintaining those assets. Our asset management team has done a remarkable job in bringing us forward, and we need to continue to do that. But I will not stop raising the issue of the ability to pay. I'm not disputing that there are many residents in our communities that more than have enough ability to pay. But there are many residents, I should say, approximately 25%, who really struggle. They struggle, they worry about their water bill. They struggle with that, they don't have the money. Their tax bill comes in, they don't have the money. They're on fixed incomes. I have residents who are now gone back to work at Walmart's, Tim Hortons, and Wendy's because they can't pay the bills. That's the way it is. So when we make these decisions and bring on new priorities, I'm fine for having that discussion. But we have to balance that against the ability to pay every single time. Doesn't matter what the priority is. And I will not stop talking about that, because it's just something that we need to have in our back of our mind as we're moving forward. How are we ensuring that all residents in our community have the ability to pay? That increase in taxes that we're proposing. All of it for great programming. Nothing that's been proposed here is not fantastic or great. But how do we pay? And that's why we need more, and thank goodness you're here, Mayor, because we need that input with the feds and the province. They listen to you. You know the stuff, you've been there, and they listen to you. They listen to my friend across the way wearing his red shirt. There you go. They want to understand what we're doing, but we can't allow the province to stealthily download more work to us because we're trying to get ahead of the ball, ahead of the game. And that's my challenge. We need to continue to push for that type of advocacy to get the kind of money that we really need. If we want to get rid of homelessness, we need supportive housing. End of the line, that's what we need, and we need the province to pay attention to that. And so I just wanted to provide that extra clarification from my perspective. May not be anyone else's around the table.
No, I really appreciate that, Councillor Clark, and I do want to thank also Councillor Huang and Councillor Nan, who are engaged in AMO and the FCM to continue having those conversations with colleagues around the country and around the province, because that collective advocacy work provincially and nationwide has also been very, very helpful and effective. Councillor Cassar, so I have a motion. I don't know if folks are ready to have a look at it. But the adopt the 9 outcomes, can we put the motion up, please, if you don't mind? There is a resolve that says council adopt the 9 outcomes identified under the council priorities. The first one is the increased non-residential growth rate. And I'm wondering if that should be amended to say, reduce the tax burden on residential taxpayers. This is under the development piece. Does that meet your, yeah, please.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, that was the intention. And just jumping off of what Councillor Clark was saying, and what I've heard around the table is there's a lot of things we want to do. One of the main things we want to do is reduce the tax burden on residential taxpayers, which kind of brings together how are we going to do all this and not overburden them. So I said what I said before. I think it can be up on the screen here. That, I think, what I proposed is better wording and more. That's what we're trying to achieve, and what was there previously would just be one of the tools that we could do to achieve that goal.
So, and this specifically then in the attachment, because the motion does speak to the attached here too as council priorities, outcomes, and measures of success, then under the increased non-residential growth rate under sustainable. So let's remember where this comes from. Council priority, sustainable economic and ecological development. It says increased non-residential growth rate. Non-residential growth rate. And so what you were suggesting is that
the proposal was reduce the burden on residential taxpayers or residential tax base, whatever the appropriate language is. I think the intent is clear, but the wording
right.
I'm certainly open and flexible on.
So that reflects it there then? Yes. And you want to strike out the specific?
Yeah, my suggestion would be that specific could be one of many specifics that staff could go and execute against. So I'm not saying not to do that, but the priority here and the direction we're giving as governors is work to reduce the tax burden on residential taxpayers. And there's many things that could achieve that goal.
And so all I would say is that we really try to put in some measurables. Those might change when staff come back with recommendations, but I think if we take out some of the measurables, we're heading in the wrong direction. We might amend those measurables, we might switch them out for something else, but we need to show people and show ourselves that we have some targets that we're prepared to work towards. So I would ask that we leave it in knowing that this is all our responsibility is going to be continuing in terms of the what those measurables look like when we come when the staff have a chance to bring the strategies forward. Councillor Taddison, please.
I just wanted to let the good councillor from Ancaster know that this was a big part of our discussion, and there was resistance. I'm not understanding fully what the resistance was, but there was a counter argument. And Neil, could you just express why we didn't have residential taxpayer
Anil?
Through the mayor, so lots of discussion around the metric, and a lot of the conversation was about the tax rate, especially as a ratio, the split currently at 1684 or whatever, very, very difficult to move in a relatively short period of time. And as a metric, it has both the underlying residential rate as well as the commercial and industrial rate. And so both of those factors actually impact what that percentage or that ratio is. And on one hand, if we're saying we'd like to increase residential, 20,000 additional units residential, that has an impact on the residential base itself. So the percentage movement is very, very slow. A report done a few years ago indicated that we need the equivalent of 20 Canada Bread sized organizations to move the percentage rate by 1 percentage point. And that's why we stayed away from tax rate and tax base and simply had a measure that we could very clearly and accurately measure in terms of how much additional economic development is taking place.
Thank you. If I can, Councillor Taddison, so I don't think that this particular change that has been suggested in terms of the reduce the burden, it doesn't speak to the ratios. But I think what Councillor Tassar was talking about is as we do our work on sustainable economic and ecological development, we're taking into consideration things like the cost of infrastructure and the cost of other things that may in fact impact the burden. And so there is no ratio there, which I think is appropriate, but what we are doing is reflecting on the burden. And I don't think that that's contrary to the conversations that we were having in reference to this particular piece. I might be wrong, Anil. Lisa, you were there. The other members of the subcommittee were there.
That is correct, Mayor, yes.
Okay, Councillor Taddison?
No, I wholeheartedly agree that when you say reduce the burden on residential taxpayers, it's a little bit different than what we were discussing. And I see that as a good goal, so I can support that.
Okay, so we have the motion in front of us. I'm hopeful, so I'm prepared to move it. I'm sorry. Oh, Lisa?
So I just wanted to make note of the change under protection of green spaces and water. So it's changed the word publicly to municipally owned.
Right.
If we could, please, thank you.
Councillor Wilson, on this particular issue?
I don't want to open a can of worms, but I have some level of discomfort with that effort to narrow it. My objective, I think a question was raised about the document is silent about partnerships. I think our objective as a council should be to look for opportunities to enhance green space. I don't really think residents are concerned about
who owns it,
who delivers that. It's the product. So if a conservation authority is enabled by a process or a decision that we could make to facilitate that, if we worked in partnership with utility companies or hydros to enable that, I would like to hear back on the rationale for the limitation. Thank you.
Could I just suggest that we keep them both in, because it doesn't take us off the hook as a municipality, and it includes the kind of the bigger picture. So municipal and public might be the way to make our municipal commitment. And if we just leave public, it might just municipally and publicly owned. Do you get what I'm saying? So we're not taking ourselves off the hook by getting rid of municipally, but we are identifying also that we have a role in the broader public opportunity. Does that fix that? Everybody okay with that, Lisa? Okay. Okay, so I'm prepared to move the motion that's in front of us. I don't know if there's anybody, Councillor Huang, thank you so much, is prepared to second that motion. But I think first we have to move and second the receipt of the presentation. So can I get a move by Councillor McMeekin, seconded by Councillor Spadafora, that we receive with great thanks the presentation provided by Anil and Lisa. Can we get that vote up, please?
And Madam Mayor, we can't share both screens, so that carried 15-0.
Okay, that carried 50-0. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much, Anil. Thank you so much, Lisa, and all of the council members that got us to this point. Really appreciate it. Okay, and so then the motion is in front of us, moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Wang, with the amendments you see before us. Councillor Alex Wilson.
Are we just, maybe this is a silly question because it's on the screen, are we voting on A, B, and C? I just asked because earlier when bringing up feedback on the bullet points was told that's not the activity we're doing today. We're only focusing on the 9 bolded headings, but C is saying explicitly we are approving these 20 directions. So that's just, I'm a little confused because earlier when trying to talk about the 20 directions was told that wasn't what we're doing today.
No, in fact, what we are doing that, but with the knowledge that as governors, these are our expectations. This is how the conversation occurred. As governors, these are our expectations. These are targets that we're looking to measure. That goes back to the administration. The administration brings back how we do that, and that's where we have as governors, a conversation about, yes, this is what we were looking at when we set that measure of success. You've hit the nail on the head. Or, in fact, it needs to be tweaked a little bit to really reflect exactly what it is we were trying to achieve. Or staff might come back and say, we set this measure, you set this measure, here's the implications it might have. So we think we need to change it in some way, and that's when we say yes or no, or do you know what I mean? So it goes back to the thing that Anil said, it's a living document, but if we don't set some kind of measure of success and some kind of outcomes that are expected, then we're not really giving direction to the leadership team here. And I think that's why I would say that, yes, it's included.
Would it be a friendly amendment to the mover just to include those as draft? I don't want to vote no to this. I want this to be something universal. I've shared that I still don't understand why some of these metrics of success were chosen, and I've heard achievability was chosen, and this wasn't the forum to dive in deeper to that, and so I don't want to be, I support these as a drafts, and so if that's a friendly to you, I would offer that for C specifically.
Yeah, so just remember perspective, achievability in this term of council, which doesn't speak to the longer term pieces. So you're recommending some kind of an amendment?
20 draft, initial, working, just acknowledging that staff are coming back and there could be revisions, just acknowledging that's part of the process.
That's fine. That's fine. Okay, thank you. So are we ready to go to a vote then? Okay, yes, please, says Councillor McMeekin. So that's moved by myself and seconded by Councillor Huang. And we'll go to the vote. And that carries 15-0. I have to say, I'm excited. I still am excited. Yes, we can. We have a lot of work to do. We have a lot of energy, a lot of excitement, a lot of talent around this table in our team, our broader team. And we just need to move forward in a way that's thoughtful, that's reflective of our community needs and our community capacity, which I believe is immense. So thank you all very, very much. Much appreciated. On that note, I'll take a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councillor McMeekin, seconded by Councillor Taddison. And that carries 15-0. Off to the rest of your day, everyone. 12:03. Yes, we can.